And now I'm going to turn over to Mark Day, our budget director.
All right, thank you, Shauna. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, as Shauna said, to the City of Tempe Budget Planning Forum. We thank you for attending today's forum. My name is Mark Day. I'm the city's budget director, and joining me today in presenting is Tom Dunsing, our deputy city manager, as well as Wydell Holmes, the interim strategic management and innovation director. So the city is currently in the process of developing both the operating and capital budget for fiscal year 23-24 that begins on July 1st, 2023. Today is an opportunity for you to provide feedback to the city council and staff about the city's budget and budget priorities for next fiscal year. We ask that you utilize the chat feature to ask questions during or at the end of the presentation. And as Shauna mentioned, this meeting is being recorded, and we're going to have a copy of this put on the budget's website for future reference. So today we have a brief presentation about the city's budget. We also have a couple informative videos that will be part of the presentation. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have time to answer questions related to the city's budget or the city's finances in general. So the topics for today, we'll have an overview of municipal budgeting. We're going to review the operating and capital budgets. We're going to talk about identifying resources and needs, both short-term and long-term, how we gather community input like today, and then the relationship between community input and city council budget priorities. So we're going to start here. We have a brief video.
The city of Tempe is a vibrant, energetic, and forward-thinking place, attracting millions of people who live, work, play, and learn here. What we do in Tempe is different than in any other city. The programs and services we offer really do make waves in the desert. But none of it is possible without a balanced budget that reflects Tempe's diverse community. A city budget provides a blueprint for how your tax dollars are going to be spent. It shows how much revenue the city is expecting to take in and how much money is expected to go out. There are actually two annual budgets, one for operating and one for capital projects. The operating budget is for routine and daily services such as police and fire, keeping the library open, park maintenance, recreation programs, and solid waste collection, to name a few. The capital budget is a plan for large infrastructure projects. It projects the budget over the next 5 years. Some examples of capital projects are Tempe streetcar, park improvements like playground equipment, new buildings, and bike lane or road improvements. So where does the money come from for all these projects and services? There are a few different sources. One is property taxes collected from Tempe property owners. Another is sales tax, which is collected anytime you make a purchase in Tempe. City revenue also comes from construction projects, federal and state partnerships, as well as service fees. Some city services, including solid waste collections and water utilities, charge user fees to collect revenue. These are called enterprise funds, and that means the city must collect enough revenue from users to cover the costs of providing those services. So how does the Tempe City Council decide what projects and services to fund? The city has identified 5 strategic priorities: safe and secure communities, strong community connections, quality of life, sustainable growth, and financial stability and vitality. These priorities have several goals attached to them. Every project, every service need is weighed against those goals to help the council make its budget decisions. The city tracks its progress towards these goals with a comprehensive data dashboard that shows all of the work that's being done. And of course, Tempe residents are the most important part of the process. The city collects resident input from online surveys, pop-up events, city council meetings, and public forums. This input helps the council understand how the community wants its money spent. As you can see, there's a lot that goes into the city budget process. But the outcome is worth the effort. A balanced budget that works for everyone in the Tempe community.
So sorry about that skipping. We will have a link to the video. I'll give you resources at the end of the presentation. There's a link there where you can see that video. Again, we apologize for that skipping. So let's talk about a little bit about why the city budgets. First of all, we manage our limited resources. So probably like your home budget, you do not have unlimited resources, you have limited resources. So prioritization of needs is crucial to the process to ensure we have sufficient funds or resources to address the needs of the city. Secondly, for strategic planning, the city has established measurable standards of service through performance measures, and we allocate resources to meet those standards of service. So we're going to talk a little bit later in the presentation about the use of performance measures in our budgeting process. And then thirdly, there's a statutory requirement for every city and town in the state of Arizona to adopt a budget. It has to be an annual process, and the budget has to be balanced. We do develop the budget in a public process. As you can see here, we've listed the public meeting dates. These are all city council meetings held at the council chambers here in downtown Tempe. On the left, you'll see the capital budget meeting dates and what will be discussed. And then on the right is the operating budget. And then in the middle is the actual meeting dates. As you saw in the video, there were two budgets that we actually put together. We combine them at the end when we adopt, but we develop them separately. We have an operating budget that controls your day-to-day operations. So things like electricity, fuel, personnel costs, those type of things. It is a one-year plan. As I mentioned, by state statute, it has to be just an annual budget, a one-year budget. Things we think about when we put the operating budget together. It's first of all, we want to align to council adopted priorities and tie those to performance measures. So we make sure we allocate resources to the most important needs and priorities of the community. We also evaluate operational needs to ensure we have sufficient funding to maintain our existing service levels and increase funding if possible for areas that are priorities. We monitor economic trends and indicators to ensure city revenues are sustainable, and we make sound financial decisions in order to be able to maintain or expand services. And then lastly, here in that fourth quadrant, we monitor legislation to evaluate potential impact on city resources from a reduction in city revenues, or if we are burdened with some unfunded mandates. This gives you a perspective. So this is the current year budget, fiscal year 22-23, so July 1st through 22 through this coming June. The operating budget is $665.8 million. In the blue there, you can see most of our revenue comes from taxes. A lot of that is sales tax, but we also have property tax in there. And then in the gray here, that's another large area, state shared revenue. So we do receive revenue from the state, and we'll cover that in a little bit here, from income tax, sales tax, and vehicle license tax. User charges are for those operations where the user of the service pays for it, things like water, wastewater, your sewer bill, solid waste pickup, trash pickup. And then you can see a lot of other miscellaneous types of revenue, such as fees, grant programs. Our federal housing programs are in here. And then this graph is a representation of where the money is spent or where it's budgeted. The largest part is personnel costs. The city employs quite a few individuals to help provide the services. Supplies and services, fuel, electricity, motor vehicle parts, those type of things. Debt services in here, repayment of debt for our large capital projects, and then some miscellaneous things here. And you'll see that the total revenue and expenditures are equal, demonstrating a balanced budget. Then we move on to the second budget we put together. This is our capital budget. These are large infrastructure projects, so maintaining the city's existing infrastructure or adding to the infrastructure. So for example, the Clark Park pool is under construction right now and is scheduled to open this summer. That would be adding to the infrastructure, maintaining our existing buildings, streets, water treatment plants, those type of things. These are large projects, so we spread those out or plan ahead, if you will, over a 5-year period. The way we put the capital budget together, each of the departments have asset management plans for all of our infrastructure. And we understand about the asset life cycle and the asset condition. So our goal here is to replace things when they need to replace, do the deferred and preventative maintenance that is required. And we're primarily focused on maintaining the existing infrastructure with system expansion when we have sufficient resources to do that. On the other side here is how much we determine to fund. We try as much as possible to use cash funding, or as we call it, as pay-as-you-go. Otherwise, we do issue bonds with this, which is authorized by the Tempe residents. We have to stay within statutory debt limits and make sure we have sufficient revenue to repay those bonds. And then this is like the operating budget. This is the capital budget representation of, this is revenue. Source of funds, as you can see, most of it is bond funded. And we have also in the green here, we have outside revenue. So we try as much as possible to utilize federal funding, particularly in the transportation programs, to enable us to fund capital projects. And then in the blues here, as you can see, is the bond funding. And then where do we spend it? General purpose would be primarily maintaining the city's buildings and facilities like recreational facilities, multi-gen centers, and you can see that's the bulk of the CIP. Enterprise would be things like the water treatment plants that would be in here. And then you can see we spend quite a bit on transportation, and then special purpose would be things like our municipal arts program. And then this is an overall of the total budget here. So the current budget is $1.13 billion. And we operate under a fund structure. The city, like all cities in Arizona, you can see the general fund, which is our pays for overall city services, is $272 million. Things like library, public safety, parks maintenance. Special revenue are those revenues dedicated for a special purpose or restricted, that's $175 million. Our enterprise funds are those funds that we utilize to run operations where the user of the service pays for it. So we have water, wastewater, solid waste, our ambulance fund, as well as golf. We just talked about capital projects. And then this is the annual debt service payment on the bonds that are outstanding. And then we have internal service. We are a self-insured city, so this is the cost for that, those items. We've, I know I've went over quite a bit of information. We have put together a budget and brief document, which uses a lot of graphics and it's easy to understand, explains both the operating and capital budgets and how we prioritize the budget. And at the end of the presentation, we'll give you a link to the budget webpage where you can look at this document. And with that, I am now going to turn the presentation over to Mr. Dunsing.
Great, thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, Tom Dunsing. I'm going to talk a little bit about our fund structure and sort of our financial planning that we utilize to develop our budgets. And so first, the fund structure. Mark reviewed the different funds that we have. I'll start in the upper right, the general fund. And typically, most of the discussion during the budget process is in our general fund, which is our largest operating funds. And again, that funds things like our public safety, our community service programs, social service programs. Again, the majority of the operating services that we provide. Moving to the left, we also have special revenue and special assessment funds. And these funds are really legally restricted uses of money. A good example of that, if we get a grant, we will establish a special revenue cost center in the special revenue fund to account for the revenues coming in and the expenditures going out that are related to the grant. And again, it's legally restricted, can be legally restricted by our council. It can also be externally legally restricted, for example, by the federal funding agency. Moving down, I'm going counterclockwise to our enterprise funds. Again, these are self-supporting funds through user fees. A good example of that is we've got an emergency medical transportation fund that is self-supporting through user fees that we charge. We've got a water and sewer utility, which happens to be our largest enterprise fund. And lastly, we've got our capital projects funds like Mark reviewed. Those are typically our infrastructure projects. And for example, Clark Park, the construction of Clark Park Pool and the amenities around that were all accounted for in the capital projects funds. And then typically what we do is our largest funding source for these capital projects are bonds or debt. And so the way we repay those bonds back are through our debt service funds. And again, those just go to pay bonds that we use to finance our capital projects. Next slide, Mark. Okay, what you see here is an example of a forecast, and we do forecasts for our major operating funds. This happens to be the general fund, again, which is our largest operating fund. And really the takeaway from this is we have limited sources. So what we do is in our financial planning process is we determine how much do we forecast our revenues to come in at, and then what are the cost of our services? And again, we have to pass a balanced budget. And so we have to have enough resources to be able to fund our programs. And we typically take a long-term view of that. In other words, what's the economy doing? Where do we think our programs are going? So we take a long-term view and then we dial it in to the specific year that's under budget. So the fiscal year that's coming up would be that FY 23-24, where a lot of the budget discussions will happen. But again, it starts with a long-range forecast. Next slide, Mark. So Mark talked about our largest funding source in the general fund being local taxes. And you can see here, it makes up about 60% of the revenues in our general fund. We like to kind of pull out, we also have what we call state shared revenues. These are revenues that are passed through the state of Arizona that come to all 91 cities and towns in Arizona. And it is a significant portion of our funding. So we always keep an eye on this. These could be impacted by potential legislation, or an economic downturn could affect state shared revenues as well. Next slide, Mark. And finally, one of the things that we continue to do is look at any legislative impacts that may affect our finances. What you see on this slide, there's actually two that are being discussed by the legislature as we speak, and it's the ability for any city and town in Arizona to tax food for home consumption and residential rental. If we are prevented from taxing those items, you can see there will be a significant revenue loss every year. And so we look at items like this to determine that if these pass, what adjustments do we need to make, not only in next year's budget, but long-term, because these are permanent losses of funding sources. So we'll watch these closely. We'll watch any potential legislative impacts very closely while the legislature is in session. Next slide, Mark.
All right, thank you, Tom. Next, we're going to talk about how we engage the community and its impact on the city's budgetary decisions. So the city utilizes several methods to gather community input and feedback during the budget development process. We have our annual community survey as well as a business survey every other year. We, as you know, we're having a virtual public forum right now. We also have an in-person one tonight at 6 p.m. at the History Museum. We have an online budget survey where we give you a theoretical $100 and ask you what are, for you, the top priorities that the city should allocate resources to in next year's budget. You can see the link there, tempe.gov/forum. That is currently open through March 6th. So if you haven't already done so, we would encourage you to go out there and take that survey. You can also directly email the mayor or council. There's the council communicator at tempe.gov. And then we went through the list of the public meetings that council holds regarding the budget. And then you can see the list of topics there. But all this information is on the budget website, which we will provide to you at the end of this presentation. And now we have another video, quick video, fingers crossed that we don't have skipping, but let's see how this goes here.
Hi, I'm Mayor Corey Woods. The city of Tempe is an energetic and innovative place, attracting millions of people who live, work, play, and learn here. This is reflected in the programs we offer and the services we provide. In fact, what we do in Tempe is different than in any other city. The programs and services we offer really do make waves in the desert, but none of it is possible without a budget that reflects funding for those programs and services that are priorities for our community. Every year, one of the most important things my city council colleagues and I do is pass the city's annual operating and capital budgets. But we need your help to do it. This is your budget. Your input and feedback as a resident or as a stakeholder truly matters. And when you ask, the city council and I listen. Here are just a few examples of how public input has helped to shape our city's future. You asked for better roads and sidewalks. We listened. More than $76 million will be invested in city streets and sidewalks over the next several years. Over the last year alone, we have completed 29 improvement projects citywide, amounting to more than 130 lane miles resurfaced. You asked for more investment in sustainability and conservation programs. We added an additional $1 million in funding for programs that will support the implementation of the city's climate action plan. Specifically, we are focusing on youth climate engagement, energy security, and regional and local resilience initiatives like adding shade, local food access, electric vehicle charging, and transit shelters. You told us homelessness was a top issue for you. We responded to your compassion by adding $1.5 million to hire more homeless outreach staff, address encampments citywide, establish the Care and Hope line for people in crisis, enhance park maintenance, and more. We continue to successfully operate the transitional shelter we purchased for those who are homeless. This is a proven hotel to housing model, and we plan to purchase another building in the very near future. Giving someone a safe, stable place to stay is the first step on the path to permanent housing and ending someone's homelessness. You asked for more affordable housing. We listen, and through our Hometown for All initiative, have allocated 50% of certain building permitting fees to the nonprofit Tempe Coalition for Affordable Housing. This represents more than $2.5 million annually to expand affordable and workforce housing in Tempe. Healthy and vibrant communities need a diverse mix of housing, and expanding options is critically important. So anyone who wants to call Tempe home has that opportunity. These are just a few examples of how the city budget truly works for you. And now it's our turn to do the asking. We invite you to take part in the budget planning process for the next fiscal year, which begins on July 1st. We want your feedback, and there are plenty of opportunities to get involved. We will host several public meetings this spring where you can provide input. You can also visit tempe.gov/forum and tell us your top priorities for investing in the community. To get information about all of this and the city's budget process, please visit tempe.gov/budgetplan or call Tempe 311. It's your voice that will help build the future of our great city.
So we'd like to briefly talk about how community input affects the budget. As you can see from the video, as the mayor went over, the community responded or provided council input about what are the top priorities, where resources could be allocated, and you could see through past budget processes where we allocated funds. So the input from the Tempe Forum, as well as public forums or emails to council, all is provided to the council members prior to them making any budget decisions. Your input from community and business surveys inform about 30% of our performance measures. So we measure how we're doing based on the input from the community, what you're telling us how we're doing for a number of performance measures. And then data from our community is used to develop and improve operational strategies, programs, and services as well. And now I'm going to turn it over to Wydell Holmes, who's going to talk to us about council priorities and performance measures.
Thanks, Mark, and thank you to our community for engaging with us in regards to our budget process and how we go about each year working on providing the resources to help meet these city council strategic priorities. As in the first video in the budget overview, it was mentioned that Tempe is unique, and what continues to make Tempe unique are these 5 council strategic priorities. And while most of them you could say we could overlay with any community here in the Southwest, what makes them really noted for being select of cities is how we operationalize these. And we do that through about 105 performance measures that align to these 5 council priorities. In the mayor's video, he mentioned some things in regards to priorities that we've heard from you in our community survey, our business surveys, and other forums and opportunities that we have to engage with our community. And if we could go to the next slide, please, Mark. I'd like to just highlight on our dashboard for our strategic priorities and the performance measures, we have not only the performance measure statement that shares what our goals are, what our targets are, what our baselines are, but how we're actually doing right here, right now. Some examples here are in regards to our pavement quality index. We're looking at a pavement quality index equal to 70 or more across the city. And we know that we don't want to disrupt all of the city surfaces and neighborhood roads and arterials. So we do have to manage that with some of our other planned projects and also capitalize on where we can align water infrastructure with repaving of streets and roads. So we do that based on your input about what's important to you. And we know that in the next coming year, we are prioritizing our neighborhood streets. We also, the mayor mentioned about ending homelessness, and we do track this measure in regards to the number of people who are new to our homeless management case system. And we do look at that also in alignment with our annual point in time count, knowing that there are differences in those 2 data points. And so another example of a performance measure is our tree coverage. And we would like to have a 25% shade canopy here in the city. And not only are we looking at it through maintaining our trees and also planting trees, we're also looking at where we can do this through engineered shade. And those are some of the acceleration strategies that are coming up this year. Next slide, please, Mark. So when we talk about acceleration, we have to first start with how do we align our resources? And so Tempe's unique approach is that we put performance and then we align resources around where we want to be. And that provides an opportunity through our START tool for our mayor and council to have early discussions of these priorities prior to the annual budget processes starting. So with that, we were able to look at the 105 performance measures. Council is provided 100 theoretical dollars with a maximum of $20 being given to any performance measure. And from that data, we're able to share with council as a collective body where they had consensus on priorities across the city. And they do that through aligning with the performance measures. Again, it's just an early conversation. We're not allocating resources or appropriating funding during that process, but we are trying to align those resources for the strategies and the priorities that we've set forward as a city. So we mentioned earlier about community survey results informing our performance measures, but they also inform areas where we want to emphasize. And so you'll see as an example of our community survey in 2023, we had opportunities for improvement. We kind of call this the quadrant. And when we're in the lower right hand of the quadrant, we know that these items are very important to our community, but we're probably not performing as well as we could have. And so we do have areas of focus, for example, from our 2022 survey results in regards to police services, neighborhoods, our social and human services, and also our economic and business development. We do the same model of prioritization and putting areas and opportunities for improvement into our business survey. And we have our 2021 business survey results. And at that point, because we do this survey every other year, we had an emphasis on street maintenance as well as on traffic on city streets. And so you'll see a lot of times that when we provide the START tool to council, that we have noted these items have appeared on our community survey, our business survey, and even our employee survey as items of opportunity where we want to emphasize improvement and advancement across the performance with these areas. On the next slide, I'd like to share the START tool. This is just an illustration of the tool that council receives. It's very similar to what we invite you to participate on in the Tempe Forum. So where you can allocate your 100 theoretical dollars, council does the same. And this is an example of what we present as part of the application. We share if it's meeting target or if it's currently being accelerated from another budget year. We also have links to our performance dashboard, which is at performance.tempe.gov. And then some details in regards to the points of emphasis from the community survey, or if it also appeared in the business or employee surveys. And then for this year, for 23-24, we administered the START tool in the fall of 2022. And we had 15 priority or performance measures that rose to the top in regards to areas of focus for the city. This means we're also balancing it with ongoing operations and program and service continuity. But our staff have been diligently working on how do we accelerate achievement of either feeling safety in your neighborhood, along with our website satisfaction, along with providing affordable housing in our community, and also with our general quality of city services. So council will receive acceleration strategies as part of the CIP budget kickoff, and then they'll also receive acceleration strategies proposed by staff during the operating budget presentations. And so what this really provides for us is really performance-led budgeting. And from that, when we're looking at strategies to accelerate, we're looking at it through a lens of a strategy framework. First and foremost, we want to collaborate, innovate, partner. Where can we do better with with our resources that we currently have, whether that's people, time, funds, facilities, equipment, those types of things. And then second, we guide our staff in looking at how do we shift our resources. Every acceleration does not necessarily need that third area of the framework, which is requesting for funding. We really want to first look at collaborating and shifting resources as we move forward the performance of the outcomes that we're seeking here as a city. And next slide, please, Mark. And then I'll turn it over to Mark Day. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks, Whitell. On this slide are resources that are available to you about the current budget process, as well as other useful information. So Tempe.gov budget plan is information about the city's current budget process, if you will, to develop next year's budget. It has the information from today as well as upcoming meetings. You can find all that information there. We also have financial history as part of our goal to be transparent in everything we do. We have revenue and expenditure information covering the last 5 years. We call it the city's checkbook. You can go out there and look at search all kinds of ways to search. You can search by department, types of vendor, type of expense, type of revenue. That's at tempe.gov/openbooks. The online forum where I mentioned we want you to gather your input. We give you a theoretical $100 similar to what is given to the city council, and tell us your top priorities using that $100. And it also allows you to leave comments. And then, as Whitell mentioned, the performance measures, if you want to see how we're doing, operationalize against the council priorities, performance.tempe.gov. And then with that, one last slide. There is our contact information for today's presenters, Tom Dunsing, myself, and then Whitell Holmes. And so we finished. Obviously, we wanted to leave plenty of time for questions or comments. So with that, I'm going to rely on Shauna to help us navigate if there's anything in the chat or people have questions.
Sure. So David, we see your hand up. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
There's 3 different topics that I want to try and get to as quick as possible. The city says that it's going to allocate funds to achieve the desired outcome or to achieve the standard. So the city has a goal to achieve a transit satisfaction rating by 2024. So that means we would have 12 months to go 18-point improvement. And at the same time, pavement quality, it needs to increase 10 points within the next 5 years. So we're accelerating pavement quality, but at the same time, we're not meeting other standards like transit satisfaction. And so wouldn't it make sense that we would need to allocate more funds to achieve that minimum standard? Because at the current rates that we're currently installing shelter, I mean, I ride the bus stop shelters today and they're rusted and there's holes in them and they're basically falling apart. So I can't imagine it taking 30 years for us to go through and update all of our locations. At that point, we're not actually improving our rating, because by the time we update the locations, we have to go back and update the other ones. So, I mean, I really feel like this is something that we need to put more and, allocate more resources to achieve the outcome.
Well, David, first of all, thank you for the question and thanks for being here today to have this discussion and to share, ideas and information. You're right. There are pavement quality index and our transportation system satisfaction. Those are 2 performance measures that were identified for acceleration. And we do recognize and acknowledge that sometimes we have competing interests amongst these performances, right? So for example, we want to not delay traffic, but we also want to be able to pave streets, and we also want to be able to have greater satisfaction with our transportation system. So we do recognize that there are sometimes opportunities for us to say, okay, where do we have pain points in regards to where one goal may contradict another goal, and then what strategies can we deploy around that? You mentioned additional resources. And one of the things that, just like your household, cities are challenged with, at some point you have only so much capacity. And so we really look to our staff and our community members and our partner agencies to assist us with what we really want to do is innovate around this. So how do we do both, right? It's not an and or, but how do we do both? And sometimes we know that our pace maybe perhaps at pavement quality means we can still achieve that pace, but maybe we shift to our neighborhood streets and not to our main lines where probably where you travel through our transportation system. So how can we continue to do both? But then also, like you said, address our bus stops, address, the amenities that you enjoy or we want you to enjoy in our transportation system. So there is a little bit of push and pull that goes on with that. What we do appreciate, though, is that we want to do better, not just better than ourselves, but also better than national and industry standard benchmarks. So we've put aggressive goals at times out there, because without identifying, things that are either aspirational, we wouldn't push ourselves as a city and as a community to do better with the resources that you've entrusted with us. So we are working with our transportation system staff in regards to how we can achieve this, and then we look at that alongside other strategies for some of the other performance measures. And we have to, kind of balance that. But you've hit upon a key point in regards to strategic management and strategy planning, is how do you do both without inconveniencing the other outcomes that you're wanting to achieve. I would invite you to come to the presentation. I believe it's on March 27th, and this is where we'll share some high-level strategies. And also, I'm happy to share with you, some of the more details that the staff are creating around transportation system satisfaction. So I invite you to connect with us, please.
I want to follow up with 2 quick points. I know we don't have that much time, but the city could take $1 or $2 million from pavement quality and use that to accelerate the strategies, because it's a little ironic that you talked about those side streets. That's where I travel, where we don't even have sidewalks.
Okay.
And so it's not a balanced transportation system if we're paving roads and I'm walking on the neighborhood side streets and the sidewalks don't even exist. And so it's just like, that's just not balanced. That's not fair. And yeah, I guess I want to move on, because I also want to talk about housing, because that's another important issue. And at current rates, we're not even keeping up with inflation. Tempe needs probably 20,000 affordable units at current rates. And, so we basically need to plan for about 1,000 units per year, every single year. And so we really need to find a way to accelerate those strategies as well. How are we going to accomplish that?
I'll share with you. One of the innovations is really to get to those, you said 1,000 years or 1,000 units per year. One of the things that we know is that we've got to work with both our public and private development, as well as looking at every time we have a development, what is the impact on our affordable housing and what can we do about it as a community? And so the mayor's initiative of Hometown for All actually created a dedicated funding stream to increase affordable housing here in the city. And we are working that plan and that program through both development and private donations to that fund. There was a nonprofit put together to receive those funds, and then they can purchase property here in the city. They can redevelop property, and they can then create affordable housing units. But you're right, our goal right now is just to maintain the ratio that we have, because we know that every year we slip far behind in regards to affordability. And so we're trying to work with other partners on how we get there through not only city-owned property, but also working with our developers in where they can provide affordable housing options as well. We know that that's important to our city for both workforce housing and affordable housing. And again, by putting it on the table as a priority, as a performance measure, it gets the focus and it gets the work behind it that's really required to achieve those targets. So I appreciate you bringing that forward. That is something that one day does not go by without us trying to figure out what else can we do, what more can we do in regards to affordability and housing here in Tempe.
Well, one of the most obvious things is that you would increase density, because at the current rate, Tempe is building approximately 25 affordable units per acre. So if Hometown for All is going to generate $5 to $6 million per year, and we're going to go out and buy an acre of land for $5 to $6 million, so use Apache Plaza as an example, or any property like that, then so we're going to create 25, 50 units per year, and we need 1,000 per year. Because it really seems like that's just not workable.
Right. We have to be able to keep up with the pace, right?
Yeah. No, not just keep it with the pace. To be honest, we have to
exceed it, right?
Because Arizona has introduced SB 1117 specifically for this purpose. So if Tempe wants to retain local control and we want to be responsible for our own goals and our own, our own land use, then we are going to have to demonstrate that we are capable of producing these units and meeting our affordable housing goals. So it's one thing to keep up with inflation. That would be like the minimum standard, and we're not even doing that. But we have to exceed that if we're actually going to solve the housing crisis. Because if we don't solve the housing crisis, then we're going to end up like California, and we're going to end up like San Francisco. And then what ends up happening is instead of Tempe paying $300,000 per unit, we have to pay $800,000 per unit because now homes cost $1 million. And that's exactly where we are headed, because the prices right now are already even at just 10% per year, which would be moderate. Not talking about 25, we're just talking about 10% per year. Then we already know that we are not keeping up with the minimum standard. I'm sorry, but the last thing I wanted to talk about was the urban tree forestry, because you had mentioned that you wanted to include engineered shade. I'm sorry, I'm just going to be direct about this, because
Sure.
engineered shade increases pollution, it increases urban heat, it relies on toxic chemicals from companies like 3M that poison our water supplies and result in lawsuits around the country. And at the same time, urban trees are capable of transpiration, where they actually reduce our urban heat. They're actually capable of phytoremediation, which actually reduces pollution and creates carbon sinks over time. And that helps us achieve carbon neutrality. So I cannot imagine under any circumstances that the city would change its urban tree forestry program to include engineered shade, which would actually be counter to our goals to reduce urban heat, to sequester carbon, and to reduce pollution and improve air quality.
Thank you, David. Really appreciate your input and your comments about that. With the tree coverage specifically, without talking about the engineered shade, we're not looking at changing that program. Our urban forester and his team are wonderful at advancing that. So we aren't looking at changing that. We are trying to, though, look at other ways where we can provide shade that is not solely reliant on trees, because we do have areas that you can't plant a tree in. But we also know that it's important for the health of our community, especially for pedestrians, for our residents and our visitors who use our public transportation. So we're trying to look at other angles like that. And you brought up a good point about carbon neutrality. We work very closely with our sustainability and resilience office to balance that as well. So again, back to your very first point, I just commend you for knowing that there are a lot of things that have intersections, as well as things that we have to, create a balance on what do we advance and what consequences can come with that. And that's always, up in the forefront of our consideration as well. So I just really thank you for your comments and your input today and participating in this discussion.
So just to be clear, 25% will be trees and it will always be trees.
No, to the 25%. And again, I know staff are looking at what's the best target as we look at engineered shade as well. One thing that I know I've learned from our urban foresters, we can't plant our way out of it, because we also have to maintain. And so that's another important element of our tree shade canopy. But as far as the actual percentage of trees versus, engineered, or sometimes referred to as man-made shade, they're still exploring that. The engineered shade is a new concept that we started exploring just this year, since last fall. We haven't done anything very specific other than look at what are some ways that we can do this, and still, it's not to replace our urban forest.
Well, I want to give time to other people, but
Sure.
the fact is we're not even keeping up with our transit shelters. So you're not even keeping up with the engineered shade has to be maintained as well, just as trees do. And we're not even keeping up with that. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, David.
And were there other questions? I don't see any in the chat, so you can feel free to raise your hand, put questions in the chat, or if you aren't quite sure how to raise your hand, feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions. Yes, Amina?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we got it.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate this opportunity, and I appreciate what the last gentleman was just saying. I'm very concerned. I go by Hardy and Southern all the time, that corner, and there's a homeless gentleman that is sleeping in the bus stop there. And He knows about the Oasis Center, but he's still sleeping there, and he's slept there through the rain and through this really cold weather. And it's very concerning to me that, we're thinking of building all these big complexes up by the river bottom. And I don't know, do we have some kind of percentage that any housing that gets built, there is a component of affordable housing to it? Because I'm very concerned. My daughter was raised here and works here. She's a private contractor. She's a doula. She takes care of newborn babies, but she can't afford to buy a house here. She can barely afford to pay rent here in this city. So I'm very, very concerned about the affordable housing issue and the homeless issue. So that's what I really wanted to emphasize. And I'd like to know, is there some percentage that if any housing is getting built, there is some portion of it dedicated to affordable housing? Thank you.
Thank you, Amina. Really appreciate your comments. I will try to get that, or not, I won't try. I will get an answer for you in regards to if there's a required percentage or if we're just tracking the percentage. That is not specifically in my wheelhouse, but I will follow up with you in regards to getting an answer for that for you. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because if there isn't, there should be. There should be, or we're not going to be able to have any workers that live here, and that's just going to increase our congestion on our roads, which we already have something terrible in that way. And all this road construction, which is improving the roads, is also making more congestion. So it's really important that we make sure that the people who are working here can afford to live here. Thank you.
Thank you.
And were there any other questions? And if not, Mark, we'll turn it back over to you to wrap us up.
All right. Thank you, Shauna. Well, thank you everyone for participating. Thank you for the conversation today and your comments. We'll definitely pass those on to Mayor and Council as we work through the budget development process. On the screen there, you should still be able to see the resources that we have for you. I would encourage you to go out to tempe.gov/budget plan. And again, you'll find more information about the city's budget development process, as well as upcoming meeting dates. So with that, thanks again for participating, and feel free to reach out to us with after the meeting if you have any further comments or questions. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.